Chelsea Manning, nice of you to give us your time. You've said that after your release from prison, you feel like you've re-entered a society that in fact feels like a prison, that you're still living in prison. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that when you have an experience in which you're in a sort of totalitarian environment, police state, if you will, which prison is, you become very sensitive to the reality of that. Surveillance, police presence, arbitrary rules enforcement, selective enforcement of rules on certain people. And you start seeing this happening out here in the rest of the country right now. So I'm very sensitive to this, and certainly it's accelerated in the last decade. For me, it was quite a shock for me to see just how the world I feared in 2010 has really become, an increasing reality.
Can I take you back now to that time in prison and the effect that it had on you, 7 years behind bars? It's too much to say that you've put that behind you, but are you in a period now of trying to readjust?
Oh, this is absolutely a period of readjustment for me. And, it's not just readjustment from prison, it's readjustment to a completely different world than before. I struggle every day, especially doing activism, just, to really grasp just how, how intense things have gotten in the last 10 years. I was just at I've been at multiple protests at the University of North Carolina in recent days over a Confederate statue here in the U.S. And I've certainly never seen this level of intense activism on the part of students before, and also like intense standoffishness between students and their own state government. So this is a new world for me to adapt to.
When you were in jail, did you ever pause and reflect or reassess or even regret the decision that you took to release all of that information, the decision that had you charged, convicted and sent to prison?
It's not something that plays in your mind. What plays in your mind is day-to-day survival. I lived very much from breakfast to lunch to dinner to sleeping to waking up.
Just reading about your story, before you went into the army, you said that you were not a very political person, that you'd almost entered the army out of a sense of apathy and a lack of direction in your own life. What was it about being in the military, about being in Iraq, that changed you?
I wasn't very political. I was aware of politics, I was aware of history, but I didn't really have I was kind of apathetic prior to the election of 2008 here in the U.S. That year, Proposition 8, which was a referendum to ban previously allowed same-sex marriage in the state of California. This was a reversal of marriage equality. So essentially, a majority of voters in the state of California were allowed to alter the constitution of the state to effectively, at the time, divorce 11,000 people. Some of my friends even. So this was certainly a very shocking thing for me, especially as somebody who was under the assumption that the world gets better and that that institutions work things out. It certainly made me realize that we have to be skeptical of these systems, and I think that the assumptions that we in our society make are perhaps not proper assumptions to make. Maybe we need to question those. So I certainly became a lot more critical in how I thought about politics after that.
One of the things that you were charged with was aiding the enemy. And the criticism of you was that by releasing all of that information, you were potentially putting other servicemen and women at risk, putting their lives on the line. When you were making that decision, Were you thinking about that? Were you thinking about the potential consequences?
The U.S. government in the last almost decade now has said could have, or perhaps, or potentially cause damage, and whatnot. And even the Department of Defense is, the records are out there that, not even the Department of Defense felt that there was any damage. So this idea of hypotheticals is, I think, by throwing a ball, you could have hit a window, is I think a non sequitur.
Chelsea, when I look at your life, it seems to me as if the fundamental question here, the fundamental issue, is this issue of identity, that you're trying to reclaim a sense of yourself against others who are looking to define you, whether that be you in the military, whether it be your sexual transition, whether it be the political decisions that you've made. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, absolutely. I've written about this many times, that many of us don't get to explain ourselves or to identify as who we are without requiring somebody to explain us or to define us. I just think of something as simple as a gender marker. Who gets to determine what your gender is? The truth is, it's your gender, and you get to determine that from the true perspective. But states arbitrarily determine, on different criteria based upon laws that we don't have any say in, or barely have any say in, because we're such a small segment of the population. But yeah, and especially from a very deep and personal level, I have repeatedly been denied my own agency, or the ability to claim that I even can make decisions. I think that somehow when I make when I make a decision in my life, somehow it's impulsive, or I was influenced by something or someone, and I think that's a real shame. I think, and it's obviously very frustrating to have to live with this constant questioning of my own ability to make decisions, and to take responsibility, and to ultimately be the captain of my own ship, if you will.
You're very sensitive about the language that's used, and very critical of the language that's used, particularly about you. I want to put some words to you now and get your response to this. People have described you as a traitor. When you hear that, what do you hear?
It's funny enough, it's used by people who are in power. They're in positions of power, and they are in they seem to be people who are typically very nationalist in their alignment. So there's a political element, and also the word these words get thrown a lot, especially in the United States right now. Donald Trump is a traitor. Hillary Clinton is a traitor. James Comey is a traitor. John Brennan is a traitor. Everybody's it's a very politicized word that really has no meaning.
Another word that's used about you is criminal, and people have said they do not want to share platforms with you or appear with you because they see you as a criminal.
Well, Rosa Parks was essentially a criminal. Many of the people that that were involved in any movement in the last 2 centuries at least has been labeled a criminal for their activism, or their political agency, for doing things that might be outside of the law, that may or may not, that often are for the good reasons. So there's this notion of morality, and there's this notion of legality, and they do not align all the time. Often they're often in conflict with each other, I find. So criminal is a very it's a very loaded word that gets to be used by a certain class of people, and tends to be used from a more nationalist and a more a stronger state position. I think of the the sort of tough on crime approach that often a lot of American politicians have used in the last 30 years. It's very loaded.
You're also often described as a whistleblower, and you're put in the same camp, if you like, as Edward Snowden or Julian Assange. Does that description, whistleblower, sit well with you?
I don't see myself as a limit, I don't limit it to that. I think it's a very limiting term. I've certainly done a whole lot of activism in my life, which I think that it would be limiting to define myself as one thing like that. I've always viewed the things that I do as forms of a more political action, a more direct form of action as an individual.
Just finally, you're coming to Australia. Are there things here that you're aware of, issues in Australia that you would like to campaign on, that you would like to bring to the focus of your own activism?
Yes, there's very similar issues to the U.S. in fact that I find are worthy of discussion. I'm thinking again, bringing up the point of immigration, which is something that I often talk about. I'm very critical of how Australia has dealt with the immigration issue. Also, the carceral system, especially in relation to the immigration system, very similar to how we have immigration and customs enforcement here in the U.S., in which many immigrants are detained. Australia has a long and complicated history with imprisoning or holding people in various camps, whether on the mainland of Australia or in outlying areas.
Chelsea Manning, good to talk to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a good one.